There are dominant fighters in MMA, and then there's Khamzat Chimaev. From the moment he stepped into the UFC, it was clear. This wasn't just another promising prospect. This was something different, something terrifying. A fighter who didn't just want to win, he wanted to break his opponents. Most fighters enter the octagon with a strategy. Khamzat enters with a mission: to erase his opponent from existence as quickly and violently as possible. You heard that right. 2 fights, 10 days. And in that entire time, his opponents landed only 2 clean shots. And the way he does it, straight up supervillain behavior. Who else grabs a top 15 fighter, carries them across the cage, and holds a casual conversation with the UFC president? Most fighters struggle for years just to break into the UFC rankings. Chimaev, he walked in and started treating world-class competition like sparring dummies. And the scariest part? He was just getting started. Trash talk is common in MMA. But when Chimaev says it, you believe him. He doesn't just make threats, he delivers. Every single time. Oh, and if you thought he was just a grappler, that right hand he threw at Gerald Meerschaert would like to have a word. 1 punch, 17 seconds, lights out. He can wrestle you into the canvas, but if you somehow manage to keep it standing, that might be even worse. Early life and the struggles that shaped him. Khamzat Chimaev was born on May 1st, 1994 in Chechnya, a place that has bred some of the toughest fighters in the world. If you don't know Chechnya, let's break it down. It's a small republic in Russia, nestled in the Caucasus region, a land of warriors, a place where toughness isn't a choice, it's a necessity. For decades, Chechnya endured war, political turmoil, and extreme poverty. Survival wasn't guaranteed. Families like Khamzat's had to fight for everything, literally and figuratively. In this environment, combat sports weren't just hobbies, they were a way of life. And if you've ever watched Khamzat fight, you've probably noticed the scar on his lip, a battle mark that only adds to his intimidating aura. But the story behind it? Not what you'd expect. When Khamzat was only 2 years old, he took a brutal fall down a concrete staircase in his home. The impact was devastating. His lip was torn open, his teeth were knocked out, and his nose was completely broken. It was bad, really bad. And here's the wild part. His nose never healed properly. To this day, he still can't breathe out of his right nostril. That fall could have ended his journey before it even started, but instead, it became just the start of something great. Wrestling, migration, and the gym that became home. Khamzat started wrestling at the age of 5 in his hometown of Gvardeyskoye. From a young age, he showed incredible promise, outworking kids older and stronger than him. It wasn't long before he became one of the best young wrestlers in the region. He even went on to win a bronze medal at the Russian National Championships at the junior level, a sign of just how high his potential was. But life had other plans. In 2013, at 19 years old, his family made a life-changing decision. They moved to Sweden in search of a better future. Leaving home wasn't easy, and starting over in a new country came with challenges. But Khamzat found his refuge in training. He joined a local wrestling club and immediately stood out. Coaches were stunned by his raw talent, and it didn't take long for him to start winning national championships in Sweden. But training wasn't just something he did, it became his entire life. Without much money and still adjusting to his new home, Khamzat moved into the gym. Not just crashing on mats after late training sessions, he actually lived there for almost 3 years, having his own small room inside the facility. His days were simple: train, eat, sleep, repeat. Most fighters talk about sacrifice, but few have lived it the way Khamzat did. No distractions, no luxuries, just pure, relentless grind. As the years went by, wrestling alone wasn't enough. He was hungry for more, and that hunger led him to MMA. From the moment he walked into an MMA gym, it was clear, this wasn't just a wrestler learning to fight. This was a wrecking machine waiting to be unleashed. Within a few years, he racked up an undefeated amateur record. Then, in 2018, he turned pro. The result? Complete destruction. He ran through the competition in Brave CF, finishing every opponent with ease. The world started paying attention. The UFC couldn't ignore him any longer. Chimaev officially signed with the UFC in July 2020, but his road to the organization wasn't a straight shot. Before getting the call, Khamzat had been utterly demolishing opponents in Brave CF, finishing every single fight. His dominance was undeniable and word started to spread. Then, one day, the UFC finally took notice. His debut? A short-notice fight against John Phillips in the middleweight division. Most fighters need time to adjust to the bright lights of the UFC. Khamzat? He made it look effortless. From the opening bell, Khamzat wasted no time. He immediately closed the distance, secured a takedown, and put on a grappling clinic. Phillips had no answers. Khamzat dominated every second of the fight, raining down ground and pound and controlling the action with ease. By the second round, he secured a DRC choke, forcing Phillips to tap. Chimaev's unstoppable run. One fight was all it took for Khamzat Chimaev to send shockwaves through the MMA world. But he wasn't here for just one fight. He wanted to fight again, immediately. Just 10 days after dismantling John Phillips, Khamzat stepped into the octagon once more, this time against Rhys McKee. If fans thought his debut was a fluke, they were about to get a rude awakening. The fight was barely competitive. From the moment the referee signaled the start, Chimaev shot in, took McKee down, and proceeded to unleash relentless punishment. McKee, making his UFC debut, found himself in the worst possible scenario. Underneath Khamzat Chimaev, drowning in pressure. Less than 4 minutes later, it was over. Another finish. Another performance of the night bonus. And just like that, Khamzat had set a modern UFC record, the fastest turnaround between wins in the promotion's history. 2 fights, 2 finishes, 0 damage taken. Khamzat Chimaev wasn't just winning. He was making world-class fighters look like amateurs. By now, the MMA world was on notice, but Khamzat wasn't satisfied. He wanted more, and the UFC was ready to give it to him. Less than 2 months later, he faced Gerald Meerschaert, a veteran known for his slick submissions and knockout power. Many believed this was Chimaev's first real test, a fighter with experience, durability, and finishing ability. That test lasted 17 seconds. The moment the fight started, Chimaev marched forward and launched a right hand that shut the lights off on Meerschaert instantly. One punch, one shot, walk-off knockout. The UFC apex went silent for a second before erupting in disbelief. Khamzat had just sent an undeniable message to the middleweight division. His power was just as terrifying as his wrestling. 3 fights, 3 finishes, 3 different ways, and not a single opponent had landed more than a handful of strikes on him. The hype was now at an all-time high. Fighters started to take notice. Dana White couldn't stop praising him. Some fans called him the next Khabib. Others believed he was even scarier. But one thing was certain, Khamzat Chimaev was not just a prospect anymore. He was a problem. Overcoming adversity. After his flawless first 3 fights, the UFC decided it was time for a true challenge. Khamzat was booked against Leon Edwards, a top welterweight contender. The MMA world was buzzing. If he won this fight, he could be looking at a title shot. But then, disaster struck. Chimaev tested positive for COVID-19, and the fight was scrapped. The virus hit him harder than expected. Struggling to breathe, unable to train, and dealing with lingering health issues, Khamzat suddenly found himself in the toughest battle of his life. Outside the cage. For months, he remained on the sidelines. At one point, he even considered retirement, posting a now infamous message on social media suggesting he was done with fighting. But Dana White and his team weren't ready to let him go. After medical treatment and time to recover, Khamzat was back, and he was more determined than ever. His return fight was against Li Jingliang, a dangerous knockout artist and a ranked welterweight. Many questioned if Khamzat would be the same after his long layoff, but those doubts vanished the moment the fight started. Chimaev picked Li up, literally, carried him across the cage while talking to Dana White, and then slammed him to the mat. From there, it was classic Khamzat. He dominated the fight, locked in a rear naked choke, and forced the tap in the first round. He was back, and he was just as terrifying as before. Now, with 4 dominant wins under his belt, Chimaev was on the verge of superstardom, but his toughest test was yet to come, one that would push him to the absolute limit. Khamzat faces fire. After running through every opponent with ease, Khamzat was matched up against Gilbert Burns, one of the most dangerous welterweights in the UFC. Burns was a former title challenger, a Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belt, and a knockout threat. For the first time, people wondered, could Khamzat be stopped? What followed was one of the greatest fights in recent UFC history. From the opening bell, it was clear this was different. Burns wasn't going down easily. The two warriors traded bombs, engaged in wild exchanges, and tested each other's will. Khamzat dropped Burns early, but the Brazilian fought back hard, rocking Chimaev multiple times. It was a war, a brutal, high-paced battle where neither man backed down. For the first time in his UFC career, Khamzat was in deep waters, but he refused to break. He dug deep, pushed forward, and after 3 rounds of non-stop action, he won a razor-close decision, bloodied but victorious. Chimaev had passed the biggest test of his career. Chimaev had proven he wasn't just a wrecking machine. He had heart, grit, and the ability to fight through adversity. His stock skyrocketed. Fighters and fans alike respected him even more. Even Khabib Nurmagomedov, the undefeated legend, acknowledged his toughness. While Chimaev's style was different from Khabib's, the influence was undeniable. The relentless pressure, the dominance on the ground, the mindset. It was clear Chimaev had studied the Dagestani great. Khamzat becomes a global icon. After the Burns fight, Khamzat's popularity exploded. No longer just a rising contender, he was now one of the most talked about fighters in the UFC. His mix of raw aggression, elite skills, and a no-nonsense attitude made him a must-watch athlete. Social media played a huge role in his rise. Clips of his fights, his wild interviews, and his iconic catchphrase, "I smash everybody," went viral. His fearless attitude, willingness to fight anyone, and dominant performances turned him into a fan favorite. The comparisons to Khabib Nurmagomedov grew stronger. Both were undefeated. Both came from the Caucasus region. Both dominated their opponents with relentless wrestling. But while Khabib was calm and calculated, Khamzat was wild and unpredictable. He was the perfect storm of skill and chaos, and fans loved every second of it. But fame also brought challenges. More eyes meant more pressure, more critics, more expectations. Could Khamzat keep up this pace? Could he maintain his aura of invincibility? The Beast's next hunt. With his undefeated record still intact and a trail of destruction behind him, Khamzat Chimaev is now closer than ever to UFC gold. His next fight could be the one that defines his legacy. Potential opponents for his next bout include the winner of the upcoming fight between Israel Adesanya and Nassourdine Imavov, which is anticipated to take place in the summer or fall of 2025. Additionally, current UFC middleweight champion Dricus du Plessis has publicly called for a matchup against Chimaev, stating his desire to face him in his next title defense. As of now, no official announcements have been made regarding Chimaev's next fight. Fans eagerly await confirmation of his upcoming opponent as he continues his quest for a championship title. His upcoming fight is not just about another victory. It's about proving that the hype was never just hype, that the dominance we've seen from the start wasn't a fluke. Can he maintain his aura of invincibility? Can he become a champion? From the small wrestling gyms of Chechnya to the bright lights of the UFC, Chimaev's journey has been nothing short of extraordinary. He came from struggle, from hardship, from a life that forged him into the relentless warrior we see today. So, where did this monster come from? He came from the grind, from the mountains, from the struggle of a man who refused to be ordinary. Khamzat Chimaev didn't just arrive in the UFC, he stormed in like a wrecking ball, changing the game forever. Oh, and his nickname, Wolf. Chimaev's nickname is proof that he is still deeply connected to his native place. The word Bors directly translates to wolf in Chechen, the language of Chimaev's homeland Chechnya. In Chechen culture, the wolf represents bravery, strength, and loyalty. It is also the region's national animal. Fight fans may agree that several characteristics of a wolf are reflected in Chimaev's combat style. He dominates his opponents with his wrestling and striking prowess in the octagon. And much like wolves, Chimaev is always on the prowl to kill somebody, as he puts it. Even his Instagram profile picture is that of a fierce wolf. Interestingly enough, Chimaev did not choose the name for himself. Chimaev's former coach, Andreas Michael, gave him the moniker Boars after witnessing his training sessions. And now, as he stands on the verge of making history, one question remains: who can stop him? Which Khamzat Chimaev fight was your favorite? Let us know in the comments. And if you haven't watched our last video about the fighter who had all the talent but not the chin, stay tuned for more stories. Who should we cover next?